Privacy Engineering, and the Chief Privacy Officer reported the following to the Board of Directors toward the end of 2021. This is a quote. "Every new employee has access to data they do not need to have access to for the purpose of their role." And also added that until Twitter could reach the point where it could implement a system to manage access to data, they were, quote, "at risk of inappropriate access or use of data." They also reported that our inability to delete data compounds that risk, as we retain data that we should not have and which is therefore accessible by people who do not need to have access to this data. Tell me, Mr. Zacko, what action was taken by Twitter's board of directors in response to this rather shocking information?
This is not the first time the board of directors had been made aware of that or told this, and there was no change or mandate or charge put forward by the board of the directors.
What do they mean by when they refer to the inability to delete data? Why is that significant?
If you don't know where your data is, as we talked about, these large amounts of data, and somebody comes in and says, "I've left the system," and maybe the FTC asks, "Well, have you deleted all the user data?" You can't respond in the affirmative because
Even if you've deleted the account.
Correct, because you don't know where else this data lives in systems, because you don't know what data you have and where it is. That's correct.
So does this mean that Twitter is actually unable to delete data, or is it just unwilling?
It is unable because they do not know where it is, so they are unable to comply.
Okay. So but this has resulted from a deliberate decision at some point to adopt protocols that don't allow them to do that, right?
To choose other priorities rather than to correctly register and track and understand where their data lives.
It is physically possible. I mean, you could have a database in which you could track
Yeah, absolutely. If you knew where everything was in your database, you could go delete it. If you chose to make that a priority, to make sure that the new data coming in was correctly registered and to go back and figure out what data you have and where it is, you could absolutely go delete it. But that hasn't been prioritized over other projects such as increasing revenue or users.
Now, I'm concerned, as I assume most or all Americans would be, those who become aware of these concerns, that Twitter has seemingly turned a blind eye, rather deliberately, to some pretty significant security risks, potentially compromising their own personal data, including geolocation information, both to hackers and to foreign government agents and to other people who, for whatever reason, whether for corporate espionage purposes, for other commercial purposes or otherwise, might want to gain access to this information. Based on your disclosures, it seems to me that Twitter's CEO is more concerned with increasing influence and profits from foreign countries than with protecting user data from foreign spies or hackers. Now, you claim that Twitter has hired foreign government agents at the cost of doing, as sort of the cost of doing business in countries like India, Nigeria, and China. And as you've related, Twitter has knowingly hired these government spies so as to not risk losing access to users and markets in those countries, or in the case of China, to not lose access to advertising revenues. Do these engineers who are suspected of being foreign agents, do they have access to all user data or just a certain subset of the user data?
To be very specific, the Indian incident was not an engineer. And as I mentioned to the other senator, I think that was put in place more to understand Twitter's intent in negotiations with the court and the Ministry of India before Twitter, to have an inside information to understand.
But he worked with other people who were themselves engineers.
Yes, sir.
Had access to them.
Yes, sir. There were numerous engineers in the Indian office. I'm sorry, I focused on that and I lost the other part of your question.
So let me ask you this. Is there any way to track what data they access or the data that they share?
We found that to be very difficult. We had to set up a specific small team individually to try and create a unique environment just to allow us to track and monitor and log one individual because of the lack of general logging and access control that we found would be unscalable and not reproducible should there be any other people like that. It was a lack of basic fundamental tools and access control.
Okay, so I'm almost out of time, but I need to know this. Why would Twitter not create a tracking or a logging system to follow this sort of thing, to make sure that it was handled correctly, particularly given that they know that many foreign governments, like India and Nigeria and China, specifically want to access and use that data to find and root out and punish dissidents? Why would they want to do that? Why would they want to subject their own users to this kind of harm with the grave implications that it carries, especially in those countries?
I think they would like to, but they're simply unwilling to put the effort in at the cost of other efforts such as driving revenue. I'm reminded of one conversation with an executive when I said, I am confident that we have a foreign agent, and their response was, well, since we already have one, what does it matter if we have more? Let's keep growing the office.
Right.
Thank you, Senator Lee. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Zacko. Following up on that point, I just returned from Ukraine, where Senator Portman and I saw firsthand the extent of the damage inflicted by the Russian invasion.